Well, we could soon know more about what led to the death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells. Results from an independent autopsy are expected to be back today.
Well, it looks like this case is finally about to move, because for 2 weeks, almost everything the public thought it knew about Nolan Wells' final hours came from rumors, not facts. Here's where it actually starts. At 8:45 on a Monday morning, a park ranger walking Horn Island's northwestern shoreline stopped moving. 2 days earlier, this same 18-year-old had been laughing with friends on that stretch of coast. Now, that moment on the shoreline was about to end 2 weeks of searching in the way every family fears most. But here's what almost nobody knows yet. In his final minutes on that island, 2 different people heard 2 different plans come out of his own mouth. One says he was staying behind by choice. The other says he was coming home. Both can't be true. And tonight, GPS data, a leaked distress call, and a legal fight now heading toward a grand jury are all about to collide with that one unresolved contradiction. One of these 2 versions is wrong. Right now, nobody, not his family, not investigators, knows which one. We're not handing you the full picture yet. We're walking you through it exactly the way it unfolded, piece by piece, because the order these details surfaced in matters just as much as the details themselves. This is Nolan Wells, and what happened in the hours no one can fully explain, yet. A quick note before we begin: this case involves the loss of a teenager, and tonight's discussion may be difficult for some viewers. Hey everyone, welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Drop where you're watching from. And to everyone who's shared, liked, and commented your way through this case with us, thank you, sincerely. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He'd just graduated from Ocean Springs High School, where he played multiple sports, and had moved on to Southwest Mississippi Community College, where he played wide receiver. People who knew him described someone who showed up for his teammates even when he wasn't the one getting the spotlight. On July 4th, none of that mattered yet to the wider world. He was just a teenager heading out on a boat with friends for a holiday trip to Horn Island, a barrier island off the Mississippi coast. 3 days later, his family retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump. By then, everything about that trip had become the center of a national story. For 2 weeks, one detail sat underneath almost everything said publicly about this case, and it barely got any airtime. 2 people were with Nolan in his final confirmed minutes on the island: his friends and a young woman most people only knew by a first name. For most of that stretch, only one of those 2 accounts was actually being repeated in public. The other stayed almost entirely out of view. Her name is Katie. For a long time, even that much wasn't confirmed. She wasn't part of the first wave of coverage, and she wasn't named in the family's early statements. While people online were chasing pool party photos and out-of-context clips, the one person who may have spoken to Nolan last was sitting almost completely unidentified. Every friend on that boat had already been named and picked apart online. A judge's public statement had been read line by line, but the account that might actually resolve the central contradiction of this whole case stayed quiet for nearly 2 weeks, while second-hand claims filled the space where her actual words should have been. Part of the reason traces back to the first night Nolan went missing. According to someone who was on the phone with his mother, Christine Wansley, as she tried to figure out where her son was, Katie's name came up almost by accident, mentioned as someone Nolan had wanted to stay behind with. Then came a detail that made an already terrifying night worse. Word that Katie herself might be missing too, with nobody on that call able to say who she actually was. Picture that moment. A mother already searching for one missing child, suddenly told there might be 2, with no name to attach to the second worry, and no number to call. That particular fear turned out to be unfounded. Katie was never missing. She'd left the island safely that day on a different boat and had been reachable the whole time. Confirmation of that came not from police and not from Nolan's friends, but from Katie's own mother, Gracie McCormack, who spoke publicly once online speculation about her daughter started spreading in ways she never expected. According to McCormack, her daughter was on Horn Island that day, spent time with Nolan, and the two parted ways that afternoon. She has no knowledge of what happened to him after that. She said goodbye. She got on a different boat. She went home. If that were the whole story, it would end quietly there, the way most small footnotes in a larger tragedy tend to. It doesn't, because of what Katie's account actually says about that final conversation. It's worth pausing on what this must be like for Katie herself. By every account, she did nothing more than have an ordinary conversation with someone at the beach before going home safely. She never asked to become part of a national story. And yet her recollection of a few brief minutes has become one of the most scrutinized details in an investigation followed by millions of people. Ben Crump, representing the Wells family, says Katie's account of that final conversation has been specific and hasn't wavered. According to Katie, Nolan told her he was planning to rejoin his friends and get back on their boat before it left the island. According to the friends themselves, Nolan told them the opposite, that he intended to stay behind with Katie, entirely by his own choice. Both statements cannot be accurate. Right now, nobody with the authority to say for certain has resolved which one it is. If Katie's version holds up, something interrupted whatever plan Nolan had between stating his intention to leave and the boat actually pulling away without him. Nobody has explained what. If the friend's version holds up, Nolan made a deliberate choice to remain alone on a remote island, which raises a very different question about what happened to him in the hours that followed. There's now a third account in the mix, and it complicates things further rather than settling anything. Javon Williams, another friend who was with Nolan on the island that day, has publicly pushed back on how Sheriff John Ledbetter characterized Nolan's decision to stay behind. Williams disputes the idea that Nolan was simply expecting to catch a later ride and left it at that. His account doesn't fully match the other friend's version either, which means this case now has 3 overlapping and in places conflicting descriptions of the same 20 minutes. There's also a family connection worth including here, because it shows this scrutiny hasn't been limited to the Wells family alone. Ashley Cole, a local judge and the mother of one of the young men who was with Nolan that day, spoke publicly to push back on some of the rumors spreading online, and then deactivated her own Facebook account after photos of her minor children began circulating without her consent. Whatever actually happened on that island, multiple families are now living under a level of public attention none of them asked for. If you're finding this case as layered and unresolved as we are, this next part matters. Hit subscribe now, because we're about to walk through hard timeline data that nobody's laid out this clearly before, and you don't want to come into the next update without this context already in place. While that contradiction sits unresolved, the hard data tells its own story, and it's worth laying out in full, in order, because none of it depends on anyone's memory. At 9:56 that morning, the boat carrying Nolan and his friends left its dock. By 11:14, it had reached Horn Island. According to Brian Trasher, vice president of the volunteer search group, United Cajun Navy, the island that day was packed with boats and people, some of whom had been drinking. Not a detail about any one person, just a picture of how crowded and chaotic that stretch of coast actually was on a holiday weekend. At 4:31 that afternoon, according to the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the boat left Horn Island. Nolan was not on board. It returned to its original dock, and rather than staying there for the night, it kept moving. At 5:52, it traveled into Fort Bayou. By 6:06, it was back at the dock. Later that night, at 7:19, its position shifted once more to the Fort Bayou boat launch, before being taken out of the water and moved by vehicle to a residence owned by the boat's owners. 4 separate movements, all recorded automatically, after the moment Nolan was left behind. That sequence is still the exact window investigators are working to fully explain. This kind of data matters because it doesn't depend on anyone's honesty or willingness to come forward. It shows where a vessel was, not who was on it or what was happening at each moment. But it gives investigators, and now the public, a fixed timeline that every witness account can be measured against. New audio obtained by NBC News adds another layer here. It's a call made by Nolan's friends to a towing service after their boat began taking on water. The operator on the recording says they're at the west tip of Horn Island and that a bilge pump had failed. The boat was sinking. Asked whether everyone aboard was okay, the response was that everybody was on board. According to GPS data released alongside that audio, the call came from the western tip of Horn Island. There's a separate timeline detail that hasn't gotten much attention, and it deserves its own moment here. A friend of Nolan's called the Coast Guard around 11 p.m. that same night. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office didn't formally request Coast Guard assistance until around noon the following day, roughly 13 hours later. That gap is a documented fact, not a theory. And it's a fair question for any water search and rescue case. What happens in the hours before a formal request for federal assistance goes out matters, because search conditions and probabilities change with every hour that passes. In the days that followed, Sheriff Ledbetter's office said publicly that no foul play was suspected. That statement drew significant backlash, and it was later clarified. The more accurate description investigators gave afterward was that there were no obvious signs of foul play, not that foul play had been ruled out. That's a real distinction, and it marked a turning point in how much public trust the investigation had going forward. Nolan's body was found 2 days after he was last seen, at the northwestern tip of the island, by a National Park Service ranger around 8:45 that Monday morning. Coroner Bruce Lynn's office identified him through dental records. Lynn's office requested a full state autopsy, specifically because of the condition in which Nolan's body was found, a decision made out of caution given the uncertainty, not because of any confirmed finding of trauma. An independent autopsy was also commissioned, based in Washington, D.C., though that exam was delayed by logistical issues in transporting the body across state lines. As of the most recent reporting, both autopsies have actually been completed. What hasn't happened yet is the release of results. Cause and manner of death are still pending toxicology. The Mississippi Department of Public Safety has said publicly that toxicology review can take weeks and that every case moves through the lab at its own pace. That's not investigators withholding information for no reason. It's how the process actually works, even though it's an agonizing wait for a family that's already waited far too long. Some coverage of this case has taken the overlap between where that distress call was made and where Nolan's body was later found, and concluded that whatever happened to him must have occurred in that specific window. We want to be careful here, because that's an inference, not a confirmed finding. The western tip and the northwestern tip of Horn Island aren't necessarily the same exact spot, and 2 days of tidal movement can carry a body a meaningful distance from wherever an incident actually occurred. It's a reasonable theory for investigators to pursue. It's not something a medical examiner or any official investigation has confirmed. If that overlap turns out to matter, it's going to be because investigators had access to real tidal and current data for that 48-hour window, not because a viral video connected 2 dots that only look close together on a map. We'll keep tracking that specifically, and if you want to see it the moment it's confirmed either way, subscribing is the fastest way to catch that update the day it happens. On July 15th, Nolan's parents sat down face-to-face with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath, their first direct meeting with her office since Nolan's body was found. Ben Crump described the meeting as respectful and candid. Out of that meeting came confirmation that once the DA's investigation wraps up, its findings will go to a grand jury. It's worth being precise about what that actually means. A grand jury referral is not a verdict. It's not a formal accusation against any one person. It doesn't mean charges have been filed, and it doesn't mean investigators have concluded a crime took place. The DA's own office has said publicly that a grand jury referral does not, on its own, mean there's any criminality involved. It's standard procedure in this county for any unnatural or suspicious death. That's a direct, on-record clarification, not just one attorney's read on the process. Ben Crump released his own statement on the development. "A thorough investigation must be completed," he said, "and the district attorney must put every relevant fact before the grand jury. Nothing held back, nothing overlooked." That's both a statement of confidence and, implicitly, a warning aimed at making sure this case doesn't quietly lose momentum before it gets there. There's also a real detail worth including here that hasn't made it into most coverage of the legal side of this case. Nolan's phone was recovered on the boat itself, not with him. His parents were able to track its last known location afterward. That phone is now the subject of a separate agreement. Both the family's own experts and official investigators agreed, at that same July 15th meeting, to examine the device jointly, rather than releasing separate competing findings. As of the most recent reporting, that joint inspection still hasn't happened. Not everyone is treating the grand jury development as unambiguous good news. Former Mississippi Judge Carlos Moore, who has spoken out publicly before in this case, returned to social media with a pointed warning aimed at the DA's office specifically. Moore says he has direct prior experience with McElrath's office. He represented the family of Antoine Diamond Sims, who was killed by a Moss Point police officer in 2019, shot multiple times according to Moore, in an incident he says was caught on video with multiple witnesses. Despite what he calls overwhelming evidence, Moore says that office was unable to secure an indictment in that case. Moore's message this time was blunt. No arrest, nearly 2 weeks in. He argued that if the circumstances were reversed, an arrest would have already happened. He was candid about his own skepticism toward the timing of the DA's public announcement, questioning whether the grand jury referral would have moved forward this quickly without direct public pressure. His closing message wasn't a celebration. It was a warning that he intends to keep watching closely. This case has also drawn national attention specifically around race, and it's worth including that directly rather than glossing over it, because the family's own advocates have raised it publicly. At a National Action Network press conference, Reverend Al Sharpton put it this way: "They're not bringing race into this case, but they're not discounting it either." The Congressional Black Caucus has issued a statement echoing similar concerns. For context, Ocean Springs is roughly 79% white by census data, and Nolan Wells is black. We're including that as attributed context for why this case has drawn the level of national attention it has, not as commentary of our own, and not as any claim about the motives of any specific named individual involved. It's also worth noting there's a competing, more procedural read on all of this. Attorney Tyler Bailey has separately explained that a grand jury referral is genuinely standard practice in this county for any unnatural death. Not, on its own, evidence that foul play is confirmed or even strongly suspected. Moore's framing goes further than that, treating the referral as proof that something's actively being concealed. Both of these are credentialed legal opinions, reading the exact same procedural step in very different ways. That tension is worth sitting with, rather than resolving in either direction for you. If a case like this, one where the investigators, the family's legal team, and outside critics are all reading the same facts differently, is the kind of story you want to keep following closely, subscribing means you won't miss whichever side of this turns out to be right. There's also been more clarity this week on why the FBI has been involved at all. According to an official statement from FBI Jackson, the Bureau's involvement has centered specifically on threats made against individuals connected to this investigation. Threats that reportedly crossed state lines, which is what brought them under federal jurisdiction. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office has remained the lead agency throughout, from the first search to everything since. The FBI's role has been support, not command. That detail matters because it's easy to overstate. Federal involvement here isn't a sign that investigators suspect a federal crime in Nolan's death itself. It's tied specifically to protecting people connected to this case from a documented pattern of interstate harassment. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves has also now weighed in publicly on the case, adding another layer of statewide attention to what started as a local search and rescue effort. And that brings us to where the investigation actually stands today. The joint phone inspection agreed to on July 15th still hasn't happened. Both autopsies are complete, but toxicology results haven't been released. The family continues waiting the way they've waited through every stage of this. A search, a coroner's exam, 2 autopsies, a meeting with the DA, and now a phone that's still sitting untouched by agreement. Every major development in this case has arrived on its own separate timeline, and each one has asked this family to wait longer than anyone initially suggested they would. Amid all of that, the family has also had to plan something no parent should ever have to plan. Christine Wansley shared the funeral details publicly. The service will be held Monday, July 20th at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs, with visitation from 9 to 11 that morning and the funeral immediately after. Arrangements have been handled by Lockett Williams Mortuary. Afterward, the family will hold what Christine has described as a celebration rather than a traditional gathering at the Jackson County Fairgrounds. In her words, Nolan wouldn't want people sitting around crying. He'd want something closer to a party in his honor. That reception is open to family, friends, and current and former football teammates. That choice, celebration over mourning, has been consistent in everything this family has said publicly, and it reflects how they've described Nolan himself, someone who brought people together and made sure nobody around him felt left out. Christine has continued publicly acknowledging the people who've stood by the family through these 2 weeks. Tyler Perry is covering the cost of the funeral. Colin Kaepernick funded the independent autopsy. Reverend Al Sharpton has agreed to officiate the service. Ocean Springs Mayor Casey Vaughn and Mississippi State House Representative Jeffrey Hulum III have both reached out directly to offer their condolences, along with other state officials. Christine has said she's been especially moved by messages from Nolan's former teachers and classmates. She's also repeated one request at nearly every public appearance since this began, that any demonstrations held in her son's name remain peaceful. Nolan, she said, would never want violence associated with his memory. That request hasn't changed or hardened into something angrier over 2 weeks of public scrutiny. It stayed exactly the same, which says something about the kind of family this has been throughout all of it. Before we close this update, there are 2 claims that spread widely and deserve to be addressed directly, because both shaped public belief about this case before anyone actually verified them. The first was a photo showing Nolan at a pool party, which many people took as proof he was alive after the 4th of July. Rolling Stone confirmed, through image metadata and an account from his friend Treston Shepard, that the photo was actually taken on June 27th, a full week before Nolan ever went to Horn Island. The second was a viral video many believed captured Nolan in an argument shortly before he disappeared. Shepard has confirmed directly on Good Morning America that the voice in that recording is his own, not Nolan's. Both of those corrections matter for the same reason. In the vacuum, created by 2 pending autopsies and an investigation still gathering evidence, unverified claims have consistently moved faster than confirmed facts. A photo without context became evidence of a cover-up. A misidentified recording became evidence of a confrontation that never happened the way people assumed. Both meant something entirely different once someone with actual first-hand knowledge stepped forward to correct the record. And it's a pattern worth remembering every time a new piece of unverified content starts circulating about this case, because it's already happened at least twice. So here's where all of this actually stands. Katie's account, relayed through her mother, directly contradicts the friend group's version of Nolan's final conversation, and now a third account, from Javon Williams, complicates that picture even further. None of it has been resolved by anyone with the authority to resolve it. GPS data has placed the friend's distress call in the same general area where Nolan's body was later found. A real overlap, though the theory that it pinpoints exactly when Nolan disappeared remains an inference, not a confirmed finding. The case is now formally headed toward a grand jury, though credentialed attorneys disagree on how much that step alone actually signals. A former judge has raised serious, specific concerns about the DA's office's track record, concerns worth taking seriously without treating them as proof of anything yet. And the joint phone inspection agreed to 2 weeks ago still hasn't happened. Nolan Wells was 18. Two separate accounts of his very last conversation still can't agree, in a case where the hard data, the GPS, the audio, the timestamps, keeps adding detail without yet delivering an answer. His parents will spend tomorrow morning doing something no parent should have to plan, while still demanding the truth about how their son ended up in that water in the first place. We're going to keep following this story as that phone inspection finally happens, as toxicology results come back, and as this case moves through the grand jury process. We'll bring you the facts as we actually get them confirmed, and not a moment before. If this update gave you a clearer picture of this case than you had 5 minutes ago, that's exactly what this channel is for. And subscribing means you'll get the next confirmed update the moment we have it, instead of finding out secondhand. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.